Hello everyone and welcome to Books in the World. Books in the World is a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center, and I'm always delighted to tell people two things. One, that the Cape Cod Writers Center is in the 56th year of its existence, and this year is the 40th anniversary of the creation of Books in the World. And today we have Susan Tan. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
We're going to have a lovely time. Susan is a faculty member of the new conference that starts on August 2nd. I'm just going to hold up the program. Many Cape dwellers will see these books in their libraries and many places, but the conference is August 2nd through 5th, and you can get the full program at capecodwriterscenter.org. And Susan is teaching about writing from childhood and middle grade fiction. Welcome.
Yes,
Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, and thank you for having me.
You have written a new story, a new character in the, I'm going to call it the canon of children's literature, because Cilla Lee Jenkins, future author extraordinaire, is going to be in the hearts of children and teachers and adults for all time, I'm sure.
Oh,
congratulations, congratulations.
Thank you.
So Cilla, I'm going to give you a chance to tell everybody about her, but before you do that, I just like to tell people something about the reviews that you get and the raves.
Oh.
And it's just marvelous. And this one is from an author, Kate Beasley. And it says, this story has everything: an irresistible voice, a cast of authentic characters, a hilarious and whip-smart heroine, also some spectacular baldness and time travel. Cilla Lee Jenkins is brilliant. Her struggles may seem ordinary, but they're also extraordinary, exquisite, and very, very important. Congratulations on that. And just one more thing. School Library Journal, which is the canon of librarians all over. If it's in School Library Journal, they buy it. And if it's highly recommended, which yours is, they definitely buy it. Highly recommended for school and public libraries, but this is the part I love. Readers will identify with Cilla and wish they were friends with her in real life. No. So here she is.
Here she is,
Cilla Lee Jenkins. And I'm going to turn it right over to you to tell us more about her and yourself and how you came to write this book.
Absolutely. Oh, and thank you for reading those reviews. They came so long ago. It's sort of, you have to remind yourself sort of these lovely moments.
Yes.
And yeah, really wonderful moments sort of in the children's lit community. So my book, the first book, Cilla Lee Jenkins, Future Author Extraordinaire, is about a young mixed-race girl who is convinced she's destined for literary greatness, and she has decided to write her life story. She's found out she's having a new younger sister, she's not happy, and so she decides to write her first ever best-selling novel before her family can forget about her and how great she is, as one does. And the story is semi-autobiographical in many ways. So it's based on my family. I'm mixed race and half Chinese, and many of the stories, including the baldness that Kate Beasley mentions, come from real life, and were things that I was bald as a child, and came from a lot of things, adventures I got up to as a child. And then the second book, which came out in March of 2018, this book, Cilla Lee Jenkins, this book is a classic, picks up a year later. And in this book, Cilla, spoiler alert, she has a younger sister. She's pretty happy with it. But in this book, Cilla's asked to be a flower girl for her aunt's wedding. And her aunt is Chinese, and her aunt's marrying a Chinese man, and Cilla convinces herself that she isn't, or not convinces herself, she begins to worry that she's not Chinese enough to be a part of the wedding in the new family. There are lots of traditions in a Chinese wedding, and she realizes she doesn't know them. And so the book is very much about her first trying to learn every single Chinese tradition there is, right, in her to be Chinese enough. And when that fails, spoiler alert, she has to sort of confront this idea of, right, what it means to be Chinese, and that she is in fact enough. So these are the two books, and there's going to be a third book in March of 2019 called Cilla Lee Jenkins, The Epic Story.
The Epic Story. Well, I'm going to hold that question for you about the third book. And I want to jump into some of the reviewers and my own thoughts about this. First of all, I fell in love with the character, but right away you start seeing that this is pretty serious stuff. Even though it's lighthearted, it is written for middle school kids, but you attack some moral and cultural issues in such a lovely way.
Oh, thank you.
Can you, I have in my notes the one about it's not nice to comment about a person's face. Can you recap that little story?
Yes, of course. And
I think that's don't comment on a person's face.
Right.
So.
No, so and to give you some writing history as well.
Yeah.
So that's the first scene that came to me in the Scylla story, and that's the sort of seed for the rest of the book. And so in this moment, Scylla is asked, "What are you?" by a woman who she dubs a rude individual. And what are you is a question that mixed race kids, and well, I say kids and adults, sort of have followed them around all their lives. And actually, I came up with the scene because I was in graduate school, had been at an event, and someone came up to me and said, they didn't know me at all, and they said, they didn't even ask my name. They said, sorry, I just saw you over there, and I just had to ask, what are you?
Okay.
And it's a question that can be very well meant, but it sort of suggests an otherness, a difference, and especially when the person doesn't even know you, right? It suggests something very surface, right? I don't care about you as a person, but I can't put you in a box, and I really want to, so I'll come and ask you. So as a child, I always tried to come up with answers to this question. Usually things like a pain, a girl, a Susan. But sort of stewing about this as an adult, I began to think about both the power of the question, but also began to imagine a child who is asked this question at an age when she doesn't really understand what's being asked. And in misunderstanding it, she gets to reclaim it. So in this rude individual moment, a rude individual comes up to her and says, "I saw you across the way. What an amazing face you've got there. You're so unusual." All this language that is sort of couched in praise, but carries tones of sort of exoticism and otherness. And she says, "So I have to know, what are you?" And Scylla, who's quite young in this scene.
She's 8.
Yeah. And actually this is a flashback, so she's even younger.
Okay.
And so she sort of thinks, well, I don't know. I'm only 4 or 5, but if I have to pick now, I guess I'll be a future literary genius. That's what I am. So that's sort of where she gets to reclaim the question, and it gives her this trajectory and this path that she then moves forward in the rest of the book.
That's terrific. You have another scene on that subject with a lawyer in her grandfather's office. So she gets this pretty regularly.
Yes. No, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think for people who are not of that mixed race, and they don't know, I mean, but a lot of people would come up to you and say, "You're very attractive. What are you?" And it's not the first thing you really want to say to a person, I guess.
Right. And it's funny because that's not to say that it's bad to be interested in someone's racial or ethnic or family background. But I think oftentimes what it is it's that cursory way, right? If I'm talking to a friend and we're getting to know each other and we're exchanging family stories, knowing where they come from in their family's tradition, that's an enriching part of our exchange, as opposed to stranger in the waiting room saying, "You look so interesting. What are you?" Which is a very different dynamic. It's very
Scylla
rude.
Would say, very rude. Well, among the other themes that you attack right on, and from a child's point of view, I mean, there are quite a lot of them have to do with Chinese culture, eating in Chinatown and at the restaurant. Not only that part, which I'm going to give you a chance to talk, but I'm so enthusiastic that I have to get to this. Other point is that sometimes adults say and do things that children notice for the first time. Sometimes it's a figure of speech that makes no sense to a child. Sometimes in the restaurant, they're arguing over who's going to pay the bill, for example.
Yes.
Do you remember how you said that? This is something the adults do, which is very funny to watch.
No, exactly. Well, I think that's been one of the joys of writing Scylla, that, she's a child trying to figure out the traditions around her. So absolutely, she says, well, in Chinatown, it's a tradition that you eat with your chopsticks, and you spin the platter in the middle, and you share the best parts of the fish, and all the adults have to fight over the check. These are just Chinese traditions. And as you say, just things she sees her family members doing all the time.
Yeah. So I like the way you tackle friendships. This is a theme that goes from the first book through the second book. Children, I guess if you don't think about it and you're not an author, sometimes you don't realize what the conflicts that are going on with a child. Probably mothers get it. Scylla Lee's mother was pretty good, and father. But talk about Colleen for a bit.
Oh, yeah. So Colleen is Scylla's best friend, and she's here on the second book. It's so interesting that you say that. So Colleen is an amalgamation of some of my best friends, both from childhood and from my adult life. And there are two friends in particular from about first through third grade who specifically I drew on as a model for Colleen in elementary school. But what I find really interesting, just in what you're saying, it's a child, everything you feel is so magnified. If you have a fight with a friend, it can feel like the worst thing in the world because maybe you haven't had a fight with a friend before and you haven't felt like you've messed up. You said the wrong thing to your friend, and what will you do when the world is ending? And so what's funny for me is that actually Scylla and Colleen have a fight in the first book, and that was actually based on something that happened to me in my adult life, and different circumstances, not on the school bus, obviously. But I find that so interesting, the way that kids, and this is something I think I've really tried to explore throughout the book, that kids deal with complex emotional situations.
Absolutely.
And yeah, exactly, the same as adults, and oftentimes it's amplified for them because they've never dealt with a conflict like this before. And I think it's a great joy to explore that. And Colleen is also a friend who really complements Scylla. So she loves hearing stories, she loves science, she loves adventure. She's much more outspoken than Scylla is, so they get to, in that there's a lot of capacity for working together. There's also a lot of capacity for bumping heads and disagreeing, so I really enjoy exploring that.
She's a great friend. Speaking of that, I'm going to ask you to read a passage so people will get a flavor of your writing and the book. And this has to do with kindergarten and friendship. So if you could just start there.
Absolutely.
And if you read a bit for us and we'll listen.
Absolutely. Should I give some context?
Sure.
I can. So basically, Scylla and Colleen have had their fight, and they had this fight in the present day in second grade. But now Scylla, in recounting the story of kindergarten, she has told it to Colleen and apologized, and Colleen's apologized, and they've come back together. So this is now, and the story of kindergarten is when she and Colleen became friends for the first time. So it begins, I liked kindergarten after that. As it turns out, you can learn a lot there. I learned that you don't have to play kickball at recess, especially when a best friend is there to help you build little houses for the fairies you've imagined, and who you're sure will come and live in them after dark. When you find a big stick buried in the dirt and want to pretend it's a dinosaur bone and that you've made the scientific discovery of a lifetime, your best friend will pretend along with you, even though you both know it's probably just a stick. Your best friend will play with you on the bus, and you'll pretend your hands are dinosaurs and put on a show for only yourselves, and laugh so hard that it takes you a minute to realize that the whole bus is watching. I don't know if you can see the image. But you and your best friend won't care. And as I explained to my dad when I got off the bus today and he asked me how it had gone with Colleen, it turns out that when there's a best friend involved, trouble with words isn't all that big a deal. Because your best friend knows that there's more to you than the words you accidentally say or don't say. And you know the same thing about her. So when you're feeling shy and quiet, or just sitting there happy that she's there too, like I was today, your best friend will sit with you, and it's okay to feel like not saying anything. Though this doesn't happen much, I found, because when there's a best friend involved, there are always things to talk about, and more than enough words to go around. And I should know. Words are my life's work, after all. So that's the excerpt.
After all, I'm the future author extraordinaire. So another thing that comes through is how sensitive Scylla Lee is to the emotions of other people around her. Her parents, for example. There's this really sweet scene where her parents decide to dance. They're going to.
Yes.
She has some. Cilla Lee has some. I call her Cilla Lee. Cilla Lee Jenkins. She has had some troubles. Through this book, she's very ambivalent about her baby sister being born. That's basically what's going on.
Yeah.
And then she, I don't remember the details, but at one point her parents decide they're going to get up and dance. Do you remember?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, sure you remember. And she says something about, I decided I wouldn't mention my troubles right now. They looked like they were having a good time.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's another one of the reasons I love writing this age group. You know, it's a time period when you're really starting to observe the world around you and some of its nuances, and you're beginning to sort of become aware of your capacity to influence it. And this is something I have a really wonderful editor, and actually she was the one who pushed that scene, because Cilla, she has all these questions about the sister, and she's been called different again, you know, and she's feeling really strange about the role her sister will play in her life, but her parents are happy, and she doesn't want them to be sad.
Yeah.
You know, in just a moment of, a tiny little moment of a child's
growth,
yeah,
insight.
Yeah.
On that subject, too, there's a wonderful section where she draws her family portrait.
Yes.
This gets back to the ethnic issues that she deals with. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that moment, in school, they're asked to draw a family portrait, and Cilla begins to draw the picture, and she sort of notices one thing at first, which is that all the colors she uses for her portrait are different than the ones she uses for herself. So she's drawing and saying, oh wait, you know, my dad's, you know, skin color and my Nai Nai Nyaya, which are Chinese for grandmother and grandfather, their skin color is all very similar. And my mom's skin color and my grandma and grandpa Jenkins, theirs are very similar, but I have to use a different crayon for mine. And the same with her hair and her eyes sort of going through it. And so she's feeling ambivalent about that element. And then after the picture has been drawn, a friend comes up to her and says, you know, oh, it's nice, but why are they so far apart? Yeah. And she realizes that she's drawn her family members on opposite sides of the page with her in the middle. And in the story, at this point, the two sides of her family don't really spend time with each other. They're all very close to Cilla, but she's sort of the hub that connects them. And so that's based on something quite true. As I mentioned before, this is semi-autobiographical. And I absolutely had that moment with colors as a child. I distinctly remember it in art classes, and realizing that with my classmates, it was this very cut and dry for many of them, this very cut and dry sort of, our hair is all this color, you know, our skin is all this color. For me, it was different, but also kind of a similar feeling of wondering about those two different sides and kind of keeping them in two separate places and parts of yourself. So that was a very honest scene.
Very good, and it comes together. She's a very strong little girl, and you have said that one of your goals is to write about create strong characters. You created a female Harry Potter type person.
I did.
Tell us about that costume day.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So growing up, Harry Potter was one of my favorite series, hands down. And Harry Potter, actually, the first few books came out when I was Harry's age. So when he was 11, I was 11. When he was 12, I was 12. And then he fell behind. But so Harry Potter was a book that had such power on my young imaginative life. And this is also based on a true story. So when the Harry Potter movies came out, all my friends wanted to dress up as Harry Potter for Halloween, and I did too. But they wanted to dress up like Harry from the movies. And I wanted to dress up like Harry from the books. And I was a little offended that, you know, everyone thought of Harry as Harry from Harry from the movies. You know, I wanted to be very clear that I knew him from the books. So my best friend and I decided that we would, to show that we were true Harry Potter fans, we would go for Halloween not as Harry Potter, but as the Harry Potter books.
Creative.
And so, yes, I have a photo of this. So yeah, we took boxes and cut holes in the top and the arms, and then we painted the entire, I was book one, the entire front matter, back matter, you know, I wrote the little, tape content stuff on the back, and then she did the same with the second. So I was revisiting this memory for Cilla, and oftentimes, and I know we haven't quite talked about this, but when people ask me about writing, I often say,
Yeah.
people say write what you know, and that can be valuable in many ways. But I also firmly believe that you should write other things too, right? And write what interests you, write what makes you angry, but also write the world you want to see. And so for me, I was thinking about, okay, I want a version of Harry Potter, and I thought, hey, what is the world I want to see? Wouldn't it be wonderful if actually Harry Potter, the Harry Potter character, and this huge worldwide, global franchise featured a young woman of color? So that became Selena Moon, which is the Cilla Lee Jenkins version of Harry Potter. And so Cilla does the same thing, dressing up like a Selena Moon book for Halloween. And I actually someday would really like to write the Selena Moon story.
I guess
I got really into it.
Well, good luck to you in becoming as popular. That would be a lovely thought. Speaking of the next books, and you said you were going to write one more,
Yes.
Cilla Lee Jenkins, and she's coming out when?
So that's coming out March of 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes one a year for you?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we were talking earlier about how one decides, I've created this character, I've written 3 books about her, and now I'm not going to write anymore.
Right.
Yeah. How does that decision evolve?
Yeah, that was a hard decision. But so in the 3rd book, Cilla's dealing with some more, I would say, adults and complex issues. And everything, I always want to say everything is fine, but one of her grandparents has a stroke. And so she's sort of in the hospital dealing with her yaya who's had a stroke, and actually the premise of the book is that, and this is based on what happened in my life, my yaya had a stroke and he was bilingual. And as sometimes can happen, as he recovered from the stroke, he recovered in Chinese much faster than in English. So he actually lost a lot of his ability to speak English. And so that's what this book, it's a similar trajectory that this book is exploring. And I say that because I guess it's the advantage of being a writer. I have great fondness and affection for Cilla, and I wanted her to be older, sort of in exploring this and the very scary feelings it can bring up. So in the 3rd book, she's actually in 5th grade. So the 1st book it's 2nd, 2nd book it's 3rd, and then 3rd book we skip to 5th grade. And so one of the reasons, I think there were 2 reasons I feel like this will be the last Cilla book. One is that from the very beginning, I knew that I had 3 books and 3 stories I wanted to tell with this character. And each one has in fact hit those 3 marks. And I've been very lucky to be able to do that. And the second too is that, so I feel like I don't necessarily have a story right now that I think is sort of ready for Cilla. And also I confess, I just want to walk her up to the gates of adolescence and then say, okay, bye, you'll be fine. Enjoy
good.
Middle school.
Yeah. Is this tradition of cutting somewhat short a childhood character another? We didn't talk about your biography. You do teach children's literature
yes.
at UMass Boston, so you probably have a lot of these traditions of the canon right at your fingertips. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. I think it varies. One thing that you do see a lot are children who don't age. So something like the Junie B. Jones books, where a character just sort of stays. They get a bit older, but usually the character remains relatively static. So there's that tradition. And then of course you have traditions where characters do grow up, and that tends to move into, or oftentimes can move into young adult literature. Harry Potter arguably does that. The first book is firmly middle grade, and by the last book it's arguably young adult. It's very dark and violent. Similarly, I think of something like Anne of Green Gables, where the first book is very much considered a children's book, but as it gets older, it could be young adult. So I think that for me, I don't know, someday I might want to try writing young adult. I do think that could be fun, but I think for this particular character, I really enjoyed the idea of sort of the 3 meaty stories for her that I felt I had in me. And I'm doing that, making that terrifying leap now of writing something totally different, which is scary, but I think it's good for me. And I at some point I would absolutely return to Cilla if a story that felt sort of right for her appeared.
Good thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for writers who maybe come from a different ethnic background to tackle something the way you did, or would that just be, would it be like starting a Me Too movement? Or
I mean, I think I would say maybe it goes back to that idea of write what you know. You know, I do believe that so much of writing, for it to be powerful, it has to be honest in many ways. You know, you need to tell your truth in a certain way. But I would also absolutely say write what you want to see. You know, and I think for Scylla, that's absolutely what I did. So growing up, I actually had no books with any mixed race characters, let alone mixed race Asian characters, except for one. I found The Thief of Hearts by Lawrence Yep when I was about 9 or 10. I found it in the library, and it blew my mind that there was a mixed race Chinese character, and she had she confirmed a lot of feelings that I'd had throughout my life, but thought was just me. You know, these sort of feelings of questioning if you're enough for each side of the family, worrying about the languages you speak, things like that. And that, when I was young, that had a really powerful effect on me. And then I went back to the library ready for more, and then there weren't any others. So I always sort of hold on to that, in the sense that when I wrote Scylla, I began thinking about the stories I would have liked when I was younger, and the stories that the kids I see around, that little me would have loved to see if I were a child today. And so I think that that's the advice I would give to writers, particularly writers who don't see their stories out there. Write those stories that you wish you had had, because I think I think hopefully it's changing in middle grade literature right now. There's a really exciting surge in diverse literature and really different kinds of stories, and a real embracing of just sort of multiplicity of experience. But there's so much room for more. So I hope my advice is write the world you want to see, and write it because we need it. That's my advice.
I'm really sorry to say that we are out of time, but
wow.
I'm going to encourage people to go to your website, susantan.com. Pick
or
up
susantanbooks.com.
susantanbooks.com. Thank you very much. For teachers and librarians, Susan offers some units and some Skype sessions and topics like diversity in children's literature and others. And do come to the Cape Cod Writers Center Annual Conference in August 2nd through 5th at the Hyannis Resort and Conference Center, and take a course, even if it's only your course.
Yes. It'll be really fun, I promise.
We'll be really happy to see you all, and you will fall in love with Scylla Lee Jenkins, and please don't hesitate. Don't take a minute more to go find her and read her at your bookstores and libraries. So thank you all for listening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
And for introducing me to Scylla Lee Jenkins.
Thank
Totally
you.
appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.